Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and unfortunately our chief economist Greg Jericho is sick today, so very kindly stepping in his place at last minute is our senior economist Matt Grudnoff. Hello, Matt.
Substitute Greg.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for stepping in at such short notice. We do really appreciate it. But Matt, today we're going to be talking about tax.
Yay,
Yeah.
everybody's favourite thing.
Yeah, the Australian Tax Office released its annual taxation statistics. But please, if you're listening, don't switch over just yet, because despite this maybe being something economists are excited by and maybe no one else, there are actually some things in there that I found pretty interesting. And if you're listening to an economics podcast, you might as well.
Yeah, look, tax stats are fascinating for economists because there are lots of spreadsheets. But to be honest, it's actually the stories that you can weave out of them. It's not the numbers themselves. It's what they tell us about Australia today that is really fascinating.
Well, I mean, tax data itself really is just, learning about how much money other people are making, which is really, has been a topic of gossip since the concept of money was created and will be a topic of gossip until the end of time.
Definitely.
So, Matt, one thing that I found particularly interesting in this is that 91 millionaires in Australia paid absolutely no tax. How does that happen?
Yeah, so we're talking about people here who earned more than $1 million in 1 year. So in the last financial year that the tax stats came out for, they earned more than $1 million and yet they paid no tax. How did they do that? Well, despite earning more than $1 million, they found enough deductions to reduce their income down to basically zero, to the point where they didn't have to pay any tax. And so it was basically a process of finding lots of deductions, paying really, really smart accountants to do this, reducing that taxable income down so that in the end they didn't have to pay any tax on that gross income.
What kind of deductions are we talking about here? Like what loopholes are not to, tell anyone listening how to pay less tax at all?
Look, there are lots of different loopholes. It's all about how you earn the income. It's all what kind of deductions. So if you earn income in wages and salaries, which is what the vast majority of people get almost all of their income from, then you're an idiot. Why are you an idiot? Because you're earning it in the wrong way. It is really easy to tax wages and salaries. The government is very good at it because most people earn their income that way and that's how they want to extract tax. So you have to earn it in exotic and strange ways. And we'll go through some of how they do that. But basically, there are lots of different structures that they run them through. They set themselves up as companies. They have trusts. They earn them in capital gains, which we'll go in more detail in a sec, but all sorts of different ways in order basically to reduce that income down so they pay less tax. Or in the 91 millionaires case, no tax at all.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, maybe, more than 100,000 people earned less than $0.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah, so they made a loss basically.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people are basically running businesses or in some way have incurred more deductions than they earned in income. So when we talk about negative income, we're talking about negative taxable income. So some of those 91 didn't just reduce it to zero, they reduced it beyond zero, as in they had more deductions than they had income, and it went negative. And now that's not all 110,000 doing that. But yeah, basically it's just people who had more deductions or losses or of some kind, and they reduced their income below zero.
So as you've alluded to, millionaires don't really earn their money in the same way that, say, you and I do.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that is not coming from an income from a job that they're paid every fortnight or whatever.
Yeah, exactly right. So people who earn between $50,000 and $150,000 a year, which is the vast majority of Australians fit in that category, they earn their income overwhelmingly from wages, right? Well over 80% of their income comes from wages. But people who earn more than $1 million a year have a completely different income profile. They only earn a quarter of their income from wages. So the vast majority of it comes from non-wages, and the vast majority of that, about 60% of their income, comes in capital gains.
Yeah.
Right? And as we said, the capital gains tax discount means that half of those capital gains are tax-free, and that's why they earn it that way. They're very clever, if you like, at manipulating the system, and they've worked out that earning income as wages is crazy, right? That's how you pay tax. And they're better off trying to earn their income in different ways. And the main way they like to earn it is as a capital gain. So that means that rather than getting paid a salary or a wage, or at least in part, they get given what are called stock options, which is basically they get given shares that at a cheaper price, and then they can immediately go onto the market and sell them and get a capital gain. So instead of earning your income as a wage, you earn a little bit of a wage and a lot of stock options, and then basically you can then make those as capital gain, and it means half of them are tax-free.
It's really just a different world for millionaires, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right.
First home buyers outbid by existing home owners investing with tax breaks on their side.
Negative gearing allows property investors to offset rental losses against their taxable income.
From time to time, I'm sure the public service are looking at policy ideas.
Independent MPs are backing potential changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions, suggesting it'll help young Australians to enter the housing market.
What the Greens have put to the government is if you phase out negative gearing for everyone with more than one investment property, so they get to keep one, and capital gains tax concessions, you raise $74 billion over the next 10 years.
Oh, we've got a housing policy and that's not in it.
Because landlords who are struggling to pay the interest on a loan against the property will increase the rents.
When I was talking to Greg about all of this data before, he said that negative gearing is back in style.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that it had actually left.
Yeah, so negative gearing, right, is where the cost of running your rental property, of managing your rental property, is greater than the rent you bring in, right? And you might think, well, you know, you've got to pay a real estate agent to manage it. Some people do. You know, the hot water heater might blow up, or you might have some sort of other maintenance. And that's why people are negatively geared. But they're actually tiny, those expenses, compared to the one big expense.
Yeah.
And that is the interest on the mortgage on the investment property. And you might remember a few years back, interest rates were very low. They're not low at the moment, but the official rate went down to 0.1%, and there were people with mortgages of 1.5% or thereabouts. And because interests were so low, interest on mortgages, including investment mortgages, was so low, which means there were actually less people negatively geared. But the year the tax stats have come out, 22, 23, that's when interest rates started increasing. And so what we've seen is a lot more people are now negatively geared. It's now about 50-50. The year before, it was about 60% were positively geared and 40% were negatively geared. And by the way, that's really unusual. Mostly, people are negatively geared. Usually the vast majority of people are negatively geared in investment properties. But, you know, we had that weird year or couple of years, because interest rates were so low. But now they're coming back up. As the new tax stats come in each year, we're going to see the amount of people who are negatively geared increase again.
So what does this mean for the housing market or the rental market?
Well, it means that a lot of people are going to have bigger deductions, so they're going to pay less tax. So all of these investment owners basically are able to take those losses and claim them back on tax, and so pay less tax. So it's basically a way of reducing your taxable income.
Australia's housing market seems to be particularly cooked. I don't know if you agree, but is this
Definitely.
Is this sort of a contributing factor? Is Australia unusual in the fact that we allow people to negatively gear so much?
Yeah, so Australia's unusual in that most other countries, when you make a loss on your investment income, they don't allow you to write off other income. So let's say, Elinor, that you have an investment property.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And you're negatively geared, right?
Oh boy.
What you're able to do is you write off the rental income. We know that, because being negatively geared means your costs of running the thing were greater than your rent. But then that additional amount, let's say you were $10,000 further over, you then take $10,000 of your Australia Institute income that you earn from working at the Australia Institute, and you write that off. Now, your Australia Institute income has nothing to do with your rental property, and that's the difference. Most other countries don't allow you to flow that loss over to a different form of income. You can have it on your investment property income. You can absolutely write that off. You just can't write off your other income.
Yep. We've talked a lot on the podcast about how we in Australia, we don't tax wealth appropriately and that's making inequality worse. So does this latest data and the taxation statistics support this? Is this continuing?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that capital gains is taxed very lightly, we have a 50% discount, is an example of where we're not taxing wealth very well. The fact that we're seeing a small group of very wealthy people get into property investment. These tax stats showed something really, really interesting. They showed that a quarter of all rental properties, fully a quarter of all rental properties, are owned by 1% of taxpayers. So 1%.
Quarter, Jesus Christ. Sorry.
Yeah, 1% of taxpayers own a quarter of all investment properties.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is this huge concentration of housing, huge concentration effectively of wealth in the hands of a very small number of people, and they want to get in this investment because we tax it really badly. We allow negative gearing, but we also have the capital gains tax discount, which means that if you earn income from selling an asset for more than you bought it for, the tax office says, let's just pretend that half of that gain doesn't exist and you can keep that completely tax-free, and we will only tax half of that capital gain.
And it just so happens that the asset that this 1% is acquiring is, an essential part of everyone's life that everyone needs.
Yeah, exactly right. So, what it means is that lots of people, or this group of people, are coming in and they're demanding housing when normally they wouldn't. And that, if you have more people showing up to the auction, that bids up the price of the house. And it means that people who want to own the house to live in it themselves are getting outbid by these rich investors, and they're not able to buy houses, and they're forced to continue to rent rather than own.
Rent from probably.
From these,
these incredibly rich people. So do you think that we've got a new government in, the Albanese 2.0 government? Do you think that there's going to be more of an appetite to actually tax wealth better in Australia?
Maybe. I think the housing crisis has brought that to the fore. I think at the last federal election, one thing we saw was that both parties were under a lot of pressure to come up with policies to make housing cheaper.
But they didn't really come up with anything great, did they?
But if they continue to do nothing, as they've done in the past, then housing will continue to get more expensive. And we've seen just this week, house prices have rocketed up again because interest rates are coming back down. Then the public are going to get angrier and angrier. And eventually some politician is going to work out, you know what? Rather than protecting property investors, helping the people who want to get into the property market is a bigger group than a small bunch of property investors. And when somebody gets that political calculus right, they're going to go, you know what? Let's stop helping property investors and let's start helping owner-occupiers.
And just as a quick recap, what policies should they be introducing to do that?
The capital gains tax discount is the big one, along with negative gearing. If we scrapped the capital gains tax discount, then it wouldn't be as tax effective to own an investment property. And rather than throwing their money into property auctions on the weekend and bidding up the price, they could buy shares or other forms of assets and invest in those. And that's where we'd see property prices stop from shooting up. And then we would see more people owning their own home rather than renting.
It's not really just about sort of the size of the group that the government's sort of appealing to with these policies. I mean, it is just, as you say, 1% of Australians that own a quarter of all investment properties, compared to all other owner-occupiers, renters. It's a very small group. But is there something to be said about the amount of political power that 1% probably wield?
Yeah, it's an attitude thing. So let's go back into the distant past of John Howard. So imagine cut in with sepia,
the dinosaur age.
Yeah, that's right.
The answer's simple: get rid of it. Get rid of the capital gains tax. For their future and for their retirement, ultimately, they invest in something. Now, to hit that on the head with new taxes is crazy and defies common sense.
John Howard famously said in the early 2000s, and this kind of sums up where most political thinking on this is. He said on housing affordability, no one has ever rushed up to me and said, John, this is outrageous. You've made my house price go up. And that's the point, right? So there are a lot of people, a smaller and smaller proportion, unfortunately, who own their own home, right? And when that home price goes up, they kind of feel good about that, right?
Yeah.
My house price has gone up, even if it doesn't actually directly benefit them. Because if they ever sold their house, if you just own one house, the house you live in, if you ever sold it, you've got to go and live in another house, right? And you've got to buy another house. So
which is probably going to be more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. If your house price goes up, then the next house you bought has also gone up. So you're no better off. But people tend to feel good about seeing that their house prices have gone up.
Yeah.
And they feel particularly bad when their house prices go down, right? And so what John Howard was basically saying was, actually, it's politically really good for me to keep having house prices go up because all of these people out there, even the people who aren't investors, the investors, they're super happy. But, even owner-occupiers are going to be generally feeling good about this. I think that's what's changing, right?
Yeah.
I think there are more and more people who own their own home and think, well, look, if my house didn't change in value for the next 10 or 20 years, that's fine, right? I could sell my house, whenever I want and buy a house that also hasn't gone up for 10 or 20 years. I'm no better or worse off, right? But if house prices stay flat for the next 10 or 20 years, that means that younger people and people who are renting and want to get into owning a home, they're going to be able to buy a house, and that's a good thing. Now, the one group that does benefit from house prices going up are investors, because they don't have to buy another property if they don't want to. That capital gain is profit to them, right? That's how they earn their money. And in fact, because most of them are negatively geared, they're making a loss on renting it out, right?
Yeah.
They're not making a profit on renting it out. So the gain is the capital gain. And because it's taxed so lightly, again, half of it is tax-free, that's why they rush in and go, this is the way I want to earn my income. I want to earn my income as capital gains because it's taxed so lightly rather than other forms that are going to be more heavily taxed.
I would imagine as well that a lot of owner-occupiers are, say, might be people with kids and they're seeing their kids growing up and going, oh gosh, my kid is probably never going to be able to afford a house.
Exactly right. And that's the change in the calculus. Not only is that group of renters unhappy renters, like there are some people who are renting who want to rent, right?
Yeah.
But there is an enormous number of people, a growing group out there who are only renting because they can't get into the property market because it's too expensive. That's an angry group. That's one. And two, they have family and friends who are thinking, well, I don't have an investment property. Sure, I'm in the housing market and I'm kind of happy about that. But, if property prices stopped going up rapidly, I'm not disadvantaged. I'd actually like to see housing become more affordable. I'd like to be able to see my friends and family actually be able to buy, my kids to be able to buy a house as well. And so that's where the change in the political calculus is.
Well, let's hope the government makes some change, that there's a bit of a tipping point, but maybe before everyone gets a bit too angry.
Well, I've often said, if you're an investor, I think it's in your best interest for there to be some change, right? If we wait, right, and we resist change, the dam is going to get more and more full and the pressure is going to grow and grow. And then some populist is going to come along, right?
Yeah.
And say, well, actually, we're going to start taking houses, right? We're going to start doing terrible things to all those boomers who own, investment properties, and you're going to lose out big time. Whereas what we're talking now is we're not talking about investors losing out. If they change negative gearing in the capital gains tax discount, investors could sell their properties now into a market that's done very well, make their profit and go and invest in something else. They don't lose out. All we're saying is property prices need to stop rising rapidly. They need to flatline basically for a period of time to allow people's income to catch up and allow them to be able to afford a house. If you want to resist that change, eventually, you increase the chances that somebody's going to come along and do something stupid.
It's a good warning to put out there. Now, Matt, before he had to plead out sick, Greg did say he wanted to talk about the gender pay gap on this podcast. He said it would be, in air quotes, fun. But he's
such a fun topic.
Yeah, he's not here. So you instead get to enjoy Greg's definition of fun and talk about the gender pay gap with me. What did the ATO data tell us about the gender pay gap? Well, is it fixed?
Yeah, so the ATO data is great because it gives us how much all the different occupations earned. So we can not just look at the gender pay gap as a whole. Spoiler alert, it's still there and it's still bad, right? We can look at it by occupation. So we can find out which occupations have bigger or smaller gender pay gaps. Some of the more interesting stuff is that the gender pay gap exists even in occupations you might not think, right? So, for example, midwives. Midwives is, you might be surprised to know, a female-dominated industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the name.
Yeah, exactly right. And so the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of people who are midwives are women. There are a very, very small group of men who are midwives, right? But even in midwives, there is a gender pay gap. Male midwives earn on average 20% more than female midwives.
20%. That is cooked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of what the profession is, the overwhelming majority, so about 94% of all occupations have a gender pay gap where men earn more than women.
94%.
94%.
That is pretty gross. Well, we get 6%. Yay us.
Yeah. And so why is that? Well, it can't just be for the usual reasons that some people put up, that, women, are more likely to be part-time or, that they take time out of their careers for caring and stuff. It's actually systemic within our culture, right? And people don't like this, and this is what they arc up about, but it's true, right? Like, so there is systemic sexism within our society. And look, people don't like to admit it, but it's there. And in particular, men don't like to admit it, probably because it's like, the fish not noticing the water. Like you live in the water, you don't really notice it, particularly if you're not, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a male like me and you don't really notice it day to day.
I haven't seen any sexism out there. Nobody's been sexist to me.
Nobody's paying me less, right? I'm okay. But if you talk to women, right,
yeah,
they absolutely see it because they're the ones who are the victim of it. And so I think that men out there just need to understand that you're not likely to notice it because you're not the victim of it. And you just need to accept that all of the statistics and all of the stories tell us that this is true. And the tax stats are no different, right? Even if you adjust for, things like people taking time out for caring, people wanting to work part-time, even if you adjust for all of those factors, there is still a gender pay gap in this country. And it will continue until society changes.
Is it getting better, or the gender pay gap, or are we
You can probably say it is getting better, but it is getting better at an incredibly slow rate. So, look, yes, over time it is reducing. But look, if it continues to reduce at its current pace, it will be decades and decades before we close the gender pay gap. So, look, we are making very, very slow progress, but it's something that we need to do better at.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for stepping in at such short notice and talking about such a, in air quotes, fun topic with me.
Yeah, it was fun. I found it fun anyway.
Oh, well, thank you very much. This episode was recorded on Thursday, the 3rd of July, 2025, and things may have changed since recording. If you want to learn more about taxation or the gender pay gap or anything else, you can look at our research at australiainstitute.org.au. If you want to read more about the tax data that just came out, you can read Greg's Grudnoff column on the Guardian Australia website. Our music is by Blue Dot Sessions, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.